Well, that answered a lot of questions. It seems as though there's a massive loss in translation between our two species. It ended up taking a few weeks of getting everything straight as far as the way they phrase things, how they said things. But we seem to have gotten on the same page. Well, I shouldn't say that. At least we're on the same book, reading the same language, but not quite the same page. As it turned out, the only thing the Glontics had to go on about our species when it came to making peace was an outdated practice of marrying two families together. The only thing they had to even go on as far as humans was a limited supply of historical dramas that they seemed to pick up by passing vessels going through our sector. Hell, when they actually started mentioning some of these movies, I actually looked them up and they were finally able to watch the entire thing from front to back. The concept of marrying into rich families was lost to the Glomtic, which is why they chose outside the politicians. Well, that and the fact that the sheer corruption permeates their bodies so much that, at least to the Glomtics, is absolutely repellent. It's like sniffing straight ammonia and sulfur. I now know why I had to tell the girls to actually clean some of the town hall members, because they were very hesitant and they wouldn't automatically feed like they do on most everyone else. The complete misunderstanding of language and concepts has led to them claiming that they want to make peace when they actually want to be protected, not make peace. As human men, we are protectors by nature, and I guess somebody must have figured that out when they came to us in the form that they did. At least, that's why they thought it was best to come as female, though, from what they had seen. My girls hesitantly opened up and confessed everything. Now, I didn't know if it was out of respect, fear, affection, desperation, or whatever. All I cared is that the truth came out. Scarlet seemed to be much more frightened of giving a response as she went from that strange, kind of lighter shade of red, almost like a fire truck engine red, to a deep crimson. Cammy also deepened, just not quite as much. Before they started, I grabbed a notepad though. I didn't want to miss a thing. Their history, if they are not embellishing, is very messed up. They were originally from a garden world where the worst thing they had to deal with was pretty much each other. They had one potential danger there, but as long as they avoided it, they were fine. On that world, there was limited fauna that would, well, allow them to clean their parasites off. Much like those birds go and eat inside a crocodile's mouth. However, a new species had landed on the planet and began to colonize it. Like humans, they destroyed a large swath of the planet before they realized the jewel they were going to destroy. That was about the time that the Glomtics were collected in mass. The species that landed were the reptilians, with strange colored plumage. Listening, I remembered that the reptiles we faced didn't have any feathers, but I didn't interrupt them. The girls informed me that the trend of removing feathers to seem as clean or cleaner than others had started only recently before they left. They continued with the history of how they would be used to clean the reptiles. Their slime like bodies could easily maneuver and clean the reptiles far more efficiently than any brush, claw, beak, or chemical ever could. After a while of cleaning nothing but the reptiles, they absorbed enough of the reptilian bodies that they began to change. They adapted. They evolved to be more like the reptiles. This process was very slow, but noticeable, as their former raindrop shaped bodies now had appendages and digits. Over time, they began to absorb enough that they even gained mass, getting larger, developing eyes and mouths, and actually being able to get additional senses. What truly frightened the reptiles was the Glomtic's ability to start speaking. The girls demonstrated the language, which seemed almost like a bunch of grunts, clicks, and growls, and even a hiss. I'm not a linguist, so I can only put it akin to something like crocodiles or gators. As the Glomtics become more and more like reptiles, the debate about what should be done began. Most insisted that the Glomtics simply remain in their role as servants, while others wanted to elevate the Glomtics. This debate went on for a very long time, possibly decades, but it's kind of hard to tell. You see, Glomtics don't age. They are perpetual regenerators, and there are still some alive that have been around for probably near a millennia. Shaking this thought out of my mind, I asked them to continue. With nearly half of the reptilian population owning at least one Glomtic, those that did had their plumage removed as they cleaned now much more thoroughly without it. This was seen as a sign of status, well, at least for a while. As it turns out, the reptilians have a very matriarchal society. The fact that the birth rate had dropped due to the Glomtics didn't bother them. The fact that the males were able to satiate themselves and the amount of quote unquote assaults dropped to almost zero didn't concern them. It was when the Empress and her court were denied by a male as they chose, and he chose only to be with his Glontek servant. This is when everything happened and the schism occurred. Now, the details were confusing as neither Scarlet nor Cammy had too much to go on, but the laws did seem to suddenly change, especially with a sudden decree that Glomtics are to be sent back to their home planet. Those that had pair bonded with a Glomtic refused, obviously, causing a propaganda campaign saying that Glomtics can indoctrinate or brainwash. This is clearly not true, as the Glomtics can absorb but cannot induce chemicals in the body. The closest to what they can do is when you're pulling out chemicals at night, you end up having a dream, but your dream is basically you tripping balls all night, and sensations that end once you're fully awake. It doesn't matter what the truth was, though, as the shooting eventually began. The lizards started using weapons that are lethal to Glomtics, but non lethal to the reptiles protecting them. The reptiles protecting the Glomtics were very few in number by the end compared to those that are loyal to the Empress. So, in desperation, they loaded up a cargo hauler with all the Glomtics they could and sent them to us. The reptilians knew about us, but were unsure if first contact was a good idea. Now, they didn't have a choice at this point. The firefight, as the ship left, claimed the lives of the reptilians protecting the ship as it left off. It was automated and eventually sent straight to us. I could see the sadness on them as they both turned a shade of blue. I let them collect themselves before I told them, "Relax, you're here now. Remember that, you're here now." I only asked them why they had held this information from the general public, and they responded with, "We were afraid." I thought about it for a while. Considering what happened when the reptilians' weapons hit them, I can understand it. They didn't want the same thing to happen again. It's bad enough that several of their own had already been exploded like water balloons. Just the thought of it is enough to put a chill from the base of my spine up into my skull. Ugh. After eventually calming them down, I took my notes to my ham radio. Very carefully, I explained the situation. This was basically a confirmation of details that had been trickling out for months now. During my conversations over the radio, a few confirmed that we might have contacted the lizards if we had known all about this. It is perfectly clear that the ones that believe they run this planet would have made a deal with the devil and quickly turned the Glomtics in simply for a simple dose of tech. But anyone with a brain would know that they wouldn't have sent their best tech, no. They would have basically given plowshares to Stone Age tech personnel instead of giving us full on tractors. That sort of thing can't happen now, though. Far too many people know the truth, especially since I called the local news station to perform a live interview. The girls did not enjoy reliving those memories again, but they did so without missing any details. As more information came out from other Glomtics about the reptilians, it turns out that those that hit us were those that were trying to prove their loyalty to the crown by slaughtering the Glomtics, hence putting themselves back in the female's good graces. And this is why they were all missing their plumage. They were the ones that owned Glomtics before and had removed their plumage to be cleaned, but now, well, they don't need to be cleaned. The most interesting thing so far, at least for me, happened only a few weeks after the initial interview. Another news agency was just getting set up when Scarlett started to feel strange. I was concerned as she began to convulse a little bit. The news crew rushed a camera inside once they heard about this, and Cammy and I desperately removed her outer clothing. Although I swear this strange material still weirds me the hell out. They won't tell me if it's alive or not, but ugh, it's like holding an eel without the slime coming off in your hand. It's just gross. Yet as we watched, Scarlett began to convulse more and more violently as she kept saying she's fine. It didn't seem like she was in pain, but she was still thrashing around. And then it happened. Like an amoeba, she slowly divided down the center, slowly began pulling herself apart. Her body stretched in two directions, and the center line became apparent as it indented towards the floor. Eventually, it started showing holes and then seemingly ripping herself in half, each side seemingly missing the other, as though a sword had been swung and split her body clean down the center. As the eyes moved independently from each other, they stayed still as we watched, as the other halves of the body formed in front of our eyes. I was confused at what the hell was going on, but when it was over, there were two identical Scarlets, standing up as though nothing had happened. And by the time I looked around, the female reporter had gone outside to puke her frickin' guts out, and a few of the staff were looking quite literally green, but just couldn't turn their eyes away. And of course, there was the camera guy, who was surprisingly still but incredibly pale. I was put back by what had just happened as these twins, now half the size of the original, ran over and hugged me. I just stood there stunned as these red homunculi grabbed onto each leg, and all I could think is, okay, now there's three of them? Or is this one in two halves? What the hell's going on? The interview eventually went on as planned, though obviously a little delayed, and the girls explained that this is what happens every so many centuries. The fact that they got a chance to record something like this was beyond lucky, and seeing children of this species was enough to sway public opinion even more, especially since simple math showed that the Galactic's biological potential was so minuscule that they could even be counted as an endangered species. The look of the two girls became almost a rallying cry for those getting human defenses up and running. The colonization efforts went through the roof and into space, where Mars and Venus were both being terraformed at an alarming rate. It would still be a while, though, before anyone could actually start colonizing Venus, but humanity now had a cause. The cause was simple. We had to protect ourselves, protect our planet, protect our family, and protect our new friends. plans were made to secure the Galactic's homeworld so that they could at least go back. Yet this was going to be a very ambitious undertaking, to say the least, especially to a fledgling group like us. But there was also one problem. We also had an unknown enemy. Though we had time to build up, time to expand, time to develop, time to train, time to make ourselves stronger than the reptiles that are somewhere out there in the ether, or so we thought. Coming out of FTL was something we didn't want to see yet. Something that raised our pucker factor across the system by over 9,000. Something that made every alarm go off. Something that made me start preparing my gear again. And something wicked this way comes.